One of the benefits and pleasures of teaching is to see the professional success of former students. However, no blue skies without a dark cloud for an economist, or vice versa, I might add. That is, if there are benefits, there are also costs. In this case, the cost is that one can only bask in the glory of former students by being old. But Brigitte has been studying how to deal with being old, financially at least, in a better way, so there's some comfort in being able to be of an age to both see her success and benefit by it. In this regard, for a long time, economists have known that there were certain anomalies in the way people behaved that didn't nicely fit into the neoclassical model of choice. For many years, these anomalies were occasionally described and acknowledged, but mostly ignored. Brigitte is at the forefront, literally, of a recent movement in economics called behavioral economics that has shown in some cases these behavioral quirks are empirically very important and have serious policy and market design implications. Brigitte's research is foundational in demonstrating the empirical importance of some of these behavioral quirks. Her play in the policy space has also quite literally affected pension planning design throughout the world, including BYU's own pension plan, the MBA. This is a rare feat, to both have accomplished empirical work and to have it make a difference. For the usual resume items, Brigitte has a BA and an MA from BYU in economics, a PhD from MIT in economics, and has had faculty appointments first at Harvard, then at the Business School in Chicago, then at Penn, where she held the Belknap Chair in the Wharton School, and since 2006, Brigitte has been at Harvard as a Yetna Professor in the Kennedy School. Brigitte Madrian.
Thank you, Jim, for such a gracious introduction. Many years ago when I was an undergraduate, I recall there was an event for students and faculty in the Department of Economics where the students, I think, basically made fun of the faculty, and I recall that my job was to cast you in a humorous light. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'm grateful that if I said anything that offended you back then, that you did not extract retribution on me today. So I am very, very honored to be here amongst you, and for me, this is truly a homecoming because I feel like I really did grow up on this campus, so coming back is not just a homecoming for the transition from high school to adulthood through my college years here, but this place was a home also for a better part of my childhood. Indeed, I first started attending BYU when I was 4 years old as a student in the Child and Family Studies Laboratory Preschool program. And I think I was probably blissfully unaware that my every move was probably being watched by students and faculty, probably through two-way mirrors that I didn't know exist. And my secret hope is that I am a data point in somebody's published research study. So if anyone has inside information on that, let me know. So I matriculated as a preschooler at BYU because my father, who's here on the front row, Spencer Conde, had accepted a position as a faculty member in the sociology department here at BYU. And preschool was the first of many, many wonderful experiences that I've had here growing up. One of my favorite things when I was a child was occasionally my dad would bring me to campus to come to work with him. And I always thought it was a great honor. I loved exploring all of the buildings where he worked. He started out in the faculty office building where the economics department is now. And I thought that was so interesting because the ladies' restroom had a couch in it. I'd never seen that before. And it had this great long hallway down the middle of the building you could run up and down. And then he was moved over to the Room Hall building, and that building was more like a maze. You could play hide and seek. It was a lot of fun. And then finally moved to the Kimball Tower, which when I was a child, this was a big novelty. It was the only building, I think, in south of Salt Lake that had more than 3 floors, and it had elevators that you could use. And I loved coming to work, and I quickly figured out where all of the vending machines were. I quickly figured out where my dad kept the spare change in his desk drawer so that I could use it in the vending machines. I would roll myself up and down the hallways in all of these buildings in his wheeled office chair, which was something we did not have at home. Occasionally, I would tabulate survey responses for his research or add up scores for his students' exams. And I used to think that my dad actually brought me to his office so that I could help. And it's only many decades later as a parent that I now realize that my mother was probably begging him to take me to work in order to get me out of the house and give her a break. But they never let me feel that way. We attended all sorts of activities on campus as a child. We went to the International Folk Dancers, we went to musicals and concerts and ballets in the Harris Fine Arts Center. We watched sanitized movies in the Wilkinson Center. We visited art exhibits. We went and saw all the stuffed animals at the Monte Albee Museum. We did an annual shopping expedition to the bookstore before Christmas to buy the books that we wanted. We had steak conference in the Marriott Center. And in the summertime, my mother, who loves to swim, would take us to Helaman Halls and Deseret Towers to go swimming. And then if we were really good, occasionally we would go get ice cream at the creamery. And these were all experiences that I had not as a college student, but as a child growing up and as a college student. When I was 14, I was really lucky because my dad was one of the faculty directors of the BYU Study Abroad program in Vienna. So we spent 6 months traveling through Europe with a group of BYU students, and I looked up to all of them. And I was able to spend the first half of my freshman year when we were on study abroad taking BYU study abroad classes instead of trying to keep up with Provo High School from the other side of the world. In high school, I did what all LDS high school kids do. I came and went to EFY with throngs of other high schoolers that invade the campus. And then a couple of years later, started taking one class a semester at BYU in lieu of a class at Provo High School, and I would walk from Provo High School over to BYU and climb all of those stairs behind the Richardson building to get up to the main part of campus. And by the time I was a senior in high school, there was never any question in my mind where I would attend college. The thought of going any place other than BYU didn't even occur to me. And of course, since then, I've had affiliations with several other universities, and of course, I thought more than once, how would my life be different if I had gone someplace else to college? And I thought about that. It's an interesting thought exercise, but I can honestly say that I've never regretted the decision to attend BYU, and indeed, I feel incredibly blessed by my association with this institution on all of the wonderful experiences I had here growing up. As a full-time student, I have many fond memories as well. I can still recite "This Little Pig Went to Market" in Latin, which I learned from John Hall. I spent an entire semester studying a single Shakespeare play, King Lear, with Arthur Henry King, learning how to delve deeply into a text, and that is an experience that I will never forget. My freshman Book of Mormon class was taught by Jeffrey R. Holland, and his lectures were a lot like his general conference talks. And what an amazing experience to hear Elder Holland, before he was Elder Holland, twice a week for an entire year expound on the Book of Mormon. And then, of course, I found my academic passion in the economics department, and I'm honored and grateful to see so many colleagues and former professors here today. And I can tell them truthfully that my coursework here prepared me very well for graduate school and helped pave the way for all of the opportunities that I've had in my life since then. And I'm grateful to all of you for teaching me well and encouraging me in my aspirations to get a PhD, and for trying to get me to come back, even though I haven't done it yet. So alas, I was not invited here today to reminisce, although I was told that it was permissible to do that for a few minutes. So rather I was asked to come, talk about something of substance. So let me try for the next little while to leave you with something more than just my memories of BYU, and I'm going to have to apologize in advance. I have some slides, and I emailed them in, and they have problems with them, and I don't know whether that's because I did them on a Mac, and this is not a Mac, or whether it's because I tried emailing them from an airplane, and the internet service is kind of lousy and messed things up in the translation, or I don't know. But there are some issues, and we're just going to forge through them. We're going to plow ahead. Life happens, and we deal with it. So I have titled, and now we're not even going forward. We're really stuck. Here we go. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I have titled my remarks, Household Financial Decision Making, Mistakes People Make, Why, and Ways to Make Them Better. I wish I could tell you that in a half an hour I was going to be able to answer all of your questions about how to make good financial decisions. I'm not, but I'll try and at least give you some insights. And we're going to start out with Dr. Spock. So I did tell you that BYU gave me a wonderful education. The one place where they fell short was they taught me that according to economic models, people make economic decisions rationally, and I believe them. Now, to their credit, they are not the only ones who were teaching this at that time, because I left BYU and I went to MIT and I got a PhD for 4 years. And at MIT, they also taught us that people made economic decisions rationally. So the prevailing wisdom was that we are like Mr. Spock. We are rational actors, and we make economic decisions rationally. Well, a few years after I finished my PhD at MIT, I was an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, what was then the Graduate School of Business. It's now the Booth School. And I had an opportunity to get some data from a large company that wanted an academic to do a regression analysis of their retirement savings plan. So for those of you who are taking a class where you're learning regression analysis, yes, this is a useful skill. In the real world, this was a company that wanted a regression analysis and their consultants couldn't do it for them, so they brought me in. They wanted to understand how many employees were participating in the retirement savings plan that they offered, and were they doing a good job. So they sent me their data, and I started looking at their data. And they did something interesting in their savings plan. So originally they had a plan that was set up where if you wanted to participate, you had to opt into the plan. So the company set up the plan, and you had two options. You could save, the little piggy bank down there, or you could not save. And the key thing is that if you did nothing, if you took no action, you would not be saving. So you start out doing nothing, and then you have a choice. You can either keep on doing nothing and you'll save nothing, or you can sign up for the savings plan, but that requires taking some action on your part. So this is what they had been doing for several years. And they had decided for some arcane legal reasons that I will not go into, to change the approach they had towards enrolling people into the savings plan. And they moved to an opt-out regime, or another phrase that gets used is automatic enrollment. So in this regime, you have the same choices. So down at the bottom, you can either save or you cannot save. The difference is what happens if you do nothing. So they changed the default. So the default was if you don't do anything, we will put you into the savings plan. And if you continue to do nothing, you will stay in the savings plan. And if you don't want to save, then you have to do something. You have to take some action to stop saving. And so they had made this change, and they wanted to see what kind of an impact this was having on participation rates in their savings plan. So they sent me the data. And under the, I'm going to go back to this. So in the Dr. Spock world, you would not expect any difference here. In the Dr. Spock world, you've got the same outcomes. You can participate in the plan. You cannot participate in the plan. rational actor Mr. Spock would analyze the options, compare the costs and the benefits, as Jim Kroll suggested, decide that it was either worthwhile to save or it was not worthwhile to save, and it wouldn't matter what the initial condition was. Dr. Spock would make the best decision and end up in the same bucket in either case. So the company sent me the data, and I looked at it and discovered that under the opt-in regime, before automatic enrollment, 37% of newly hired employees were participating in the savings plan. And this was a company that, as with many other companies, offered a match of 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of pay. So from a financial standpoint, you're giving up a 3% raise if you aren't participating in the plan and saving at least 6% of pay. It's a good deal. Only 37% of employees are using it. Then the company switched to this opt-out regime, to automatic enrollment. You're in the plan unless you opt out. And what happens to savings plan participation? On average, it went up from 37% to about 85%. And it went up across the board for every single demographic subgroup in the entire organization. Now, this is hard to reconcile with a Mr. Spock view of the world, okay? Mr. Spock doesn't have his savings participation rate yanked around by little things like changes in the default. And when I saw this data, I had to sit back and think, is there any way I can reconcile this with a rational actor view of the world? Or do we have to start thinking about different models to explain behavior? And that's when I started doing research into household financial decision making and looking specifically at what are the mistakes that households make, how significant are they, and how can we think about changing institutions to help lead individuals to better outcomes. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about what are some of the mistakes that people make. Now, I could teach a whole semester-long course on mistakes that people make. So I'm just going to talk about a few of them. So if you were to ask me what's the single biggest mistake that people make, I would say the biggest mistake is they procrastinate. There are all sorts of things that people should do, and they procrastinate, and that procrastination is problematic. So they procrastinate in saving. That's what the previous chart showed you. When you have to opt in, there are many people who would like to save. They realize it's a good deal. They just don't get around to doing it. They procrastinate saving. There are other people who procrastinate in paying down their debts. Sometimes that procrastination gets them into trouble. There are many people who procrastinate getting an education. Getting an education is the most important financial decision that most people will ever make or not make. And yet we see many people who procrastinate in trying to finish their education. We see many people procrastinate when it comes to getting insurance. One of the interesting facts that has come out of the last 20 years of research on the financial mistakes people make is that people are more likely to buy insurance after something bad happens rather than before something bad happens. When do you buy flood insurance? You don't buy it before the flood, you buy it after the flood, after you've made a mistake and realize that you've lost a lot of money because you didn't have flood insurance. So procrastination is a big mistake that people make. People also make a lot of mistakes when it comes to how to invest their money, and this is an area where I've done a fair bit of research. One mistake that's been pointed to by a number of researchers is called the stock market participation puzzle. That's a long name, and basically means that people are afraid to invest in the stock market even though it's a pretty good place to put your money, at least for the long term. So people are unwilling to take risks that make sense. On the other hand, we've got people who are more than willing to take risks that don't make sense, such as gambling, which usually has a negative expected value. So people take risks that don't make sense, go to Las Vegas, and they don't take the risks that do make sense, invest in the stock market. Another investing mistake that we see people make is falls under the broad category of status quo bias. That is, they stick with the way things already are. So a good example of this would be a company that has a savings plan might provide a match to its employees in the form of employer stock. Now, here's a lesson for those of you who go out and are going to get jobs in a few years at companies that offer employer stock. And it's a very poorly diversified investment. Not something that most financial planners would encourage you to do. But if your employer gives you a match in the form of employer stock, even if you can trade out of that, in my research, we've shown that very few people actually do that. The fraction of people who persist with that status quo is as high as 80 or 90%. And that's a mistake. Related to that, another investing mistake is what is called home bias. So home bias is the idea that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So when people are trying to decide what to invest in, they feel much more comfortable investing in companies that they've heard of, companies that are close by, proximity, even though those might not be the best investment alternatives. Just because you have heard of Apple doesn't mean that Apple is the best stock to invest in. It just means they have a really effective PR department. Now, I'm not telling you you should or you shouldn't invest in Apple. I'm just using that as an example. But people are more likely to invest in companies they've heard of. They're more likely to invest in their own company because they've heard of their own company. They're more likely to invest in domestic companies than international companies because companies that are located in the country where you grew up and not companies that are located in other countries if you've never heard of them. So that's called home bias. Another mistake that people make when it comes to investing is they chase past returns even though past returns are not a good predictor of future performance. Nonetheless, people look for investments that have done well in the past and assume that if it's done well in the past, that must be a good indication that it's going to do well in the future. And the interesting thing is that a robust finding in the literature is that the money that people use to buy the stocks that have done well in the past would actually have done better if they had left it where it was. So they're selling the stocks that are actually going to do good in the future to buy the stocks that have done well in the past, and those stocks actually end up doing worse going forward. So chasing past returns is another investment mistake. Another mistake that many people make is they pay attention to things that financial services firms make salient. What do financial services firms want you to focus on? They want you to focus on past returns, and they don't pay attention to the things that matter the most, namely the investment fees that you're paying. So people don't pay attention to factors that matter a lot, fees, and they pay too much attention to factors that shouldn't matter, past returns. And then a final mistake that I'll point out, but like I said, this is a condensed list, is people actually do a very poor job at integrating the financial decisions they make across different domains. So we tend to make financial decisions in isolation. So we think about the type of mortgage we're going to get when we buy a home as just a mortgage without thinking about that in the context of a mortgage and savings and insurance products and other things like that. So we fail to integrate across different domains. So the next question is why? Why do we make mistakes like this? So there are lots of reasons. I'm going to highlight 3 particular reasons. And the first one I'm going to illustrate with a non-financial decision. And this is a classic study in psychology where people are asked to choose a food option, and the choice they have is fruit versus chocolate. And the question is, what would you choose to eat, fruit versus chocolate, and when are you choosing to eat it? So you could make a choice about what to eat today, or you could make a choice about what you want to eat a week from now. So if we're asking people today, would you like to eat fruit or chocolate a week from now, most people tell us that they would like to eat fruit next week. Okay, so you make the healthy decision. If I'm choosing today what I want to eat a week from now, you say, give me the fruit. But if we ask people, choose today for what you want to eat right now, they tell us they want the chocolate, okay? So this illustrates a principle called present bias. So we think differently about the present than we do about the future. And in particular, when we're thinking about the present, we tend to give a lot of weight to things that make us feel good today. So that would be eating chocolate rather than eating fruit. It would be going to the mall rather than putting money into a savings account, right? If we put money into the savings account, that's going to make us feel good in the future, but it's not going to make us feel any better today. So present bias makes us focus on things that make us feel good today, and a lot of financial decisions entail benefits in the future, and we tend to put those off because we're focused on things that make us happy today. Okay. Second reason why is that many of the most important financial decisions that people make are complicated. So if you're trying to decide how to invest your money, there are lots of different types of ways you can invest your money, different types of accounts. There are lots of different investment options, stocks, real estate, gold, baseball trading cards. If you're maybe something closer to home for many of you in this room, if you're trying to figure out how to finance your college education, that's not necessarily a particularly easy decision. So financial decisions are complicated, and when financial decisions are complicated, people have a tendency to procrastinate, the mistake we talked about earlier, and people also make mistakes. When things are hard, you're more likely to make a mistake. When things are hard, people also adopt simplifying heuristics to try and make the decision easier, but many of those simplifying heuristics lead people astray. So I talked earlier about home bias. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. That's an example of a simplifying heuristic. Focus on the things I know well, but that can actually lead you into making investment mistakes. So when decisions are complicated, people make mistakes. And the third reason why, and the third one interacts with complexity here, is that a lot of people are not actually particularly financially sophisticated. So I came to BYU and I got a degree in economics, so and then went to MIT and got a PhD. I've spent a lot of time studying financial decision making over the course of my career. But a lot of people major in other things and do other things with their lives. And just because you are doing something else doesn't mean you can't be financially literate. But as an empirical proposition, a lot of people who choose to specialize in other fields are less financially literate because they've decided to invest their time and attention into other matters, and that means they're investing less time and attention into things like financial literacy. So if you're not particularly financially literate and a decision is hard and complicated, it's probably not surprising that people end up making mistakes. Okay, how can we make things better? So I want to first talk about a couple of things that don't work to make things better. Thing that does work to make things better. So what doesn't work to make things better? So I just said that one of the reasons why we see people making mistakes is that many people lack the type of financial expertise they need to make financial decisions well. So you might think, well, a very natural solution then would be financial education. Now, I don't want anyone to walk out of this room and say, Brigitte Madrian doesn't think financial education is a good thing. I absolutely think financial education is a good thing. But as an empirical matter, if you're trying to actually change financial outcomes for individuals, the evidence on the effectiveness of financial education in doing that is fairly limited. Many studies have failed to find any effect of financial education on better financial outcomes. The studies that have found effects tend to find effects that are small, or that effects that occur for very specialized populations. So for example, the military has a mandatory financial education program. If you join the Army, that's a program where there's at least some evidence that it works for some financial decisions, but it's mandatory and the Army can make everyone go to it. So if we're relying on financial education to help people with decisions where you don't have a captive audience, it's going to have limited effectiveness. It's not that it's not worth doing. I think it's worth doing. I think it's important, but it's not going to solve all of the problems.
Second approach that some people have proposed to help improve financial decision making is give people financial incentives to make good financial decisions. So in the context of getting people to save for retirement, for example, give them an employer match. That's a financial incentive to do it. Or give them a tax credit for making a good financial decision, which the US and many other countries do. And the empirical evidence on financial incentives is that they work, but the effects are very, very small. So they lead to a little bit of behavior change, but the behavior change is not very big. And you're getting a little bit of behavior change, and it's very expensive to get that. Because if you want to give someone a financial incentive, you have to come up with the money to pay for that. And it's more expensive than other alternatives. So what actually works? What actually works is making good outcomes the easy outcome. Make the good outcome the outcome that's easy, and make the bad outcome the outcome that's hard. And this is exactly why automatic enrollment works when it comes to savings plan participation. Automatic enrollment works because we make the good outcome, saving for retirement, easy. You don't have to do anything, and the good outcome, saving for retirement, happens. And the bad outcome, not saving for retirement, is the outcome that requires more effort. Okay, so what works to help improve financial outcomes for individuals? Making good outcomes easy and making bad outcomes difficult. Let me give you, so just to give you an example of one approach to putting this in practice at a large scale in a positive way, and then one approach to putting this in practice in terms of making a bad outcome more difficult. The United Kingdom, which has a retirement savings system that has a lot of similarities with what we have in the US, a few years ago passed a major pension reform bill in which they have made automatic enrollment into a retirement savings plan mandatory for employers. So the employers have to have a savings plan, and they have to automatically enroll their employees into that plan. The employees, however, can choose to opt out if they want. What have they seen? So they've been phasing this in over a 5-year period, starting with the largest companies and then moving down to smaller firms. They're now working on the companies that have 30 or fewer employees. To date, they've seen only 9 to 10% of the population opt out, and they've seen a 20 percentage point increase in the fraction of the workforce overall that's saving for retirement as a result of this initiative. So by making the good outcome, saving for retirement, easy, they've led to a dramatic increase in savings plan participation. As an example of something bad that we could make more difficult, I talked earlier about employer stock as a poor investment decision for many individuals, and in many companies it's made very easy to get to this bad outcome. Namely, we give you a match in your savings plan in the form of employer stock. We're making the easy outcome, or making the bad outcome easy. The flip side would be to, say you can't give an employer match in the form of employer stock. That's the bad outcome. Let's make it difficult, or outright prohibit it. Another example of making a good outcome easy would be what are called target date funds. So target date funds are a type of mutual fund where a professional money manager determines the investment allocation in the fund, and it changes over time as you get closer to retirement. So this is an investment option that was designed to make a good outcome, a diversified portfolio for retirement, and one that gets more conservative as you get closer to retirement. The easy outcome, you don't have to think about it. All you have to think about is, when am I going to retire? And pick a fund where the date that's in the name of that fund matches about when you think you're going to retire. So that's another example of making something easy. Okay, what I want to do for the last few minutes is something that I never get to do in my in the jobs I've held in the past, which are all at secular institutions, and nobody at Harvard or the University of Chicago or the University of Pennsylvania, where I've taught in the past, is interested in thinking about how might we draw parallels between household financial decision making and gospel principles. So since I'm at BYU, I'm actually going to do that, because this is the one time in my life where I can actually do that, and you guys will not be offended. So I want to draw a parallel here with one of my favorite stories in the scriptures, and this is the parable of the talents, which you are all familiar with. So just to refresh your memory, this is in Matthew chapter 25, and we have the master who is going out of town, and he's got 3 servants, and he gives each of them some talents, which is a unit of money. He gives one of them 5 talents, he gives the second one 2 talents, and he gives the third one 1 talent, and tells them to go off and be good stewards over his investments, and then he leaves. And then he comes back some period of time later, and the first servant took his 5 talents, took them to the market, turned it into 10. The second servant took his 2 talents, took them to the market, turned it into 4. And the third servant took his 1 talent, buried it in the earth, and had 1 talent left at the end of the day, and got a severe scolding from the master for burying it and not making good use of it. And when I was growing up, I was told that this parable was about your talents, your artistic talents, your musical talents, your dancing talents, your sociability talents, your public speaking talents, that this was a parable about your talents, and you should invest in your talents, and you should be willing to share them, and you should make them grow, and all of that. But the use of the word talent to mean the way I have just described is a usage that came about in Middle English. So that's not the usage that was implied when this story was written. When the story was written, this was about money. So I would like to reframe this parable as a parable about investment. And what do we know about investment? How do you turn 5 talents into 10 talents, or 2 talents into 4 talents? The way you turn 5 talents into 10 talents is you take risk. And that's not explicitly stated in this parable, but I've decided that that's an interesting lens with which to read this parable. This parable is about taking risk, and that taking risk can actually be a good thing in a gospel sense. And sometimes we're afraid of taking risk in a gospel sense. Sometimes it's risky to talk about what we believe with people who don't share our beliefs. Sometimes it's risky to sit next to the new person that you don't know, when it might be more comfortable to sit next to someone who you are already good friends with. Sometimes it's risky to do something different than you've been doing things all along. And I don't think that this parable is telling us to go out and take crazy risks. I don't think it's telling us to go out and play the slots in Las Vegas, because that's a risk that doesn't make sense. That's a negative expected value risk. But I think one reading of this parable is that we should take sensible risks, and all of our investments, risky investments, may not pay off. But if we make enough of them, and if we're well diversified, we will come out ahead. So I would like to conclude by encouraging you, number 1, to make good financial decisions. And I know that this university, this fine university, offers classes, not just in economics, which is kind of a broad discipline, but in personal finance, and I would certainly encourage any and all of you to look into those classes if you feel like you could use a little bit more financial literacy. But I'd like to also encourage you to think about sensible risks to take in your everyday lives, in the gospel, in your relationships with other people, in your career and your job choices. And I guess I'll leave you with one last thing. People make mistakes. This whole talk was about the mistakes that people make. And making mistakes doesn't make us a failure. It makes us human. We're all human. We'll all make mistakes. And we can all learn from them and do better. And I encourage you to make mistakes, learn from them, and go forth and be good representatives of BYU in the future. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. And I'm happy to take questions for how long?
have about 4 minutes for a few questions. So let's, 4 minutes.
Yes, man in the white shirt and tie. Great question, and I think the answer is it depends on what you're investing for, whether you're investing for the short term or whether you're investing for the long term. But if you're investing for the long term, and long could be a few years or it could be 40 years, a well-diversified low-fee index fund, so something like an S&P 500 index fund with low fees, Vanguard or someplace like that, that would be a good place to start. Yeah, yes, you. Great question. So it probably depends on who you talk to, and I would like to hope maybe we don't see a wholesale replacement, but we see a richer version of models that incorporate some of the realities that we know about how individuals make decisions. So models are a useful tool. They allow us to simplify and abstract away from the real world in a way that allows us to make problems tractable and reach good predictions, but the predictions are only as good as the assumptions that go into them. And some cases, the rational actor model is okay, but in some cases, it's problematic. And in those cases, we need models that do a better job of realistically addressing how people actually behave. Yes? Yes, absolutely. So I haven't done research on that, but there are many other people who are doing research on how to think about how political decision making is different if you think about people who are like Mr. Spock versus not like Mr. Spock. Yeah. Great question. Back there in the... Saved by the bell. Good question. So the stock market has outperformed, most other investments over a 10-year time horizon by a lot. You could see lower returns and it would still outperform other investments by a lot. I think the key thing, though, is being diversified. And stocks are one piece of being diversified, but there are other assets that one could also look to in terms of diversification. The most popular one, of course, would be owning a home or real estate more generally.